What happens at the kitchen table doesn't always stay there. It shows up in the boardroom, in our leadership, and in the way we connect with people every day. In a world that feels louder and faster than ever, how do we bring more calm, clarity, and compassion into our conversations, both at home and at work? Today, we're going to dive into how communication shapes connection and why leading with empathy might be the most powerful skill that we have.
This is the Truth Be Told podcast, where we unlock the secrets of strategic communication.
Today's guest is Carla May Sheremata, a leadership coach, speaker, and the creator of the CALM method, which brings connection, awareness, language, and measured response into how we lead and communicate. Before stepping into this work, Carla May spent years in law enforcement, including 8.5 years as a school resource officer, where she saw firsthand the power of empathy and connection in even the most challenging conversations. She's also the author of Youth Truth, a book inspired by those experiences, and now works with corporate organizations, helping teams communicate with purpose, lead with compassion, and bring calm to the chaos, both at home and at work. Welcome to this episode of the Truth Be Told podcast. I'm Dave Thompson. I'm here with Carla May Sheremata. Like, what's the matter? To make sure I pronounce it right. Thanks for joining me today. I'm from Calgary, Canada.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm so honored today to be here with you.
Well, I'm so excited to talk about you've got really unique experience in the criminal justice world, but also in the leadership space, and also as a mom, and also working with charitable organizations, and also as a speaker and an author, and just all these really cool things that kind of intertwine with communication. So we're going to dive into a method you call the CALM method. We'll get into that in a little bit.
Okay.
But when you sent me a note earlier, you talked about how leadership and communication has this kind of connection from how you show up, like at your kitchen table, presents itself in the boardroom. And when I say boardroom, I guess that could be an investigative room, or it could be a leadership in a corporate setting. But what do you mean by that? And then we'll kind of dive into the background and your experience a little bit.
Yeah, so what I really mean by that is that we watch a lot of what goes on at home, especially for whoever you are. Of course, we're going to take it into our workplace, and what goes on in the workplace, we take home. And we forget that first thing in the morning, we could be sitting and having breakfast, you spill coffee, your teenager's not talking to you, and they're just kind of like that, whatever, and they leave the house. You get in your car, you're driving to work, and of course, somebody cuts you off. You get mad at that. So by the time you actually get into the office or to wherever you're going, you've already had all of this stuff happen. And now you're taking that in and trying to figure out how to compartmentalize it to go into this now work world, where either as a manager, supervisor, leader, or even just as an employee, you now have to be your best self and deal with stuff that maybe sometimes you actually don't even care about because so many other things are going on in life. But you have to figure it out. And then the same thing, stuff is going on or crap is happening at work, and you take it back in to your home. And the next thing you're fighting with your kids, you're fighting with your spouse. You're feeling like nobody's understanding me. And then all of a sudden, there's alcoholism, the drinking starts, the gambling, all of this stuff. And I mean, I've watched it in the police world. People don't talk about what's going on at work because they feel that they don't have anybody they can talk to or that'll understand them. So they go into other measures and do other things. The one biggest thing, though, that I've really watched and seen, and it's not only happening with law enforcement, but in corporate as well, we're losing many amazing people, not because of the work, but because of the leadership. And when the leaders do not connect and really learn who their people are and what they need and walk with them instead of in front of them, that's what is being lost.
Yeah, I think that's really well put. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about your book. I've got it. So if those of you that are watching, I'm holding it up now, but Youth Truth, Engaging in Conversations That Can Change Lives, and which I thought was really well written. And we'll talk a little bit about this, and I'll put the link in the show notes as well for people that are interested. But to go back to what you just said, in the beginning of the book, you talk about kind of this personal experience. I know you spent some time and some years as a school resource officer, and obviously in the police department. But thinking about this kind of connection from home to work, I know a lot of investigators struggle sometimes with separating the two. But
Mhm.
then, as you're saying, you also present yourself maybe the same in both. Do you ever have an experience where you've got, as a mom, you're working at home with kids, and then in school setting, you're working in a different kind of role, but maybe the same mentality of making sure you're guiding and being a resource. And how did you separate, or do you have any experiences where that was maybe a difficulty in separating those two roles?
When I think about it, there were some days where I couldn't separate it because I would feel like these kids were my own. And, yes, they all have parents, or many of them have parents. However, when they came into my office and if they hadn't talked to their parents about certain situations, all of a sudden I went into mom mode and I thought, if this was my child, how would I react? How would I hope that my child would want me to kind of understand, whether do they want advice? Do they just want me to listen? And so that's one of the things that I would do is just, sit with these kids and ask them, as you're telling me, number one, if you relay something, some kind of abuse or anything of that, I do have to report it because as a police officer, that is my job. Safety and protection, number one. However, as we're talking and you're relaying stuff to me, would you like me to, maybe look at different things that you can do, or, we can kind of brainstorm, or do you just want me to listen? When I started opening that up, and of course, as parents, I was not great at sitting and saying to my kid, "Hey, I'm just going to listen to you right now. I'm not going to give you advice."
Right.
Very quickly, it was like, you stop listening because I know exactly what you're going to say and I know how to deal with it. When they actually didn't want that, they just wanted somebody to listen to them. So I practiced that at school, and it was amazing to see the difference that would happen there and the information that was relayed. And then being able to talk to the kids and say, hey, you know what? I think this is something, let's get your parents involved. I'll be here, to kind of mediate or just as a support for you. And let's work this way. But going back to your question, sometimes it was easy to completely disassociate, but more times I found it, I kind of looked at it as how would my child want me to respond, and how would it, be for them if I responded in this way or in that way.
Right. You hit a few important things there, but one special takeaway, because I've learned this in personal lives, especially in relationships, not everybody wants your advice, or maybe not at that moment. I think that's I've learned that. We had another episode with Matt Halloran, who was the title of the episode was "Shut the F Up and Listen." So for those of you who want to learn about it, go back and can find that. And Matt did a great job of talking about, as a part of his career, he was an end of life therapist. And he learned that sometimes the best thing to do was to not necessarily provide advice or an answer to something that seems obvious to you, but to allow people just to talk about it. And that's got to be difficult as a parent and or as a school resource officer, because you feel like you have so much more knowledge and experience that you want to kind of bestow upon the kids.
Yeah. Well, and they've got to learn somehow. I mean, of course, we're never going to put our kids into a position where they're going to get injured, or hurt. But I remember growing, when I've got a 16-year, I guess he's almost 17 now. In November,
Yeah.
he'll be 17. But I remember when he was little, and I would say to him, "You know what? If you touch this, you're gonna hurt yourself. You're gonna burn yourself." And I was very fortunate where he never tried. Once I said something, he didn't go and, try to touch it and see what was gonna happen. And so I was very fortunate and very blessed with that. But it was kind of like, well, mom said it's hot. I don't know what else to do, besides putting barriers around everything, but we don't need to do that for our kids because they need to learn.
Right. Well, so let's go back to your experience of, for people that don't really know what a school resource officer does or their responsibility is. So I guess my first question is, Why did you go into that role? Was that something that were you chosen or you chose it for? And then what
You
does
know
that
what?
role look like?
I get goosebumps because that was one of my most favorite roles that I did as a police officer. I spent 8.5 years in the high schools, and it was a role where we had to apply to get it. And so I guess I had wanted to do it, worked very hard to put in my paperwork for the competition, and then was selected through competition to get it. And it was it was probably when I got it, I was just so excited. My son was a year old when I went back into the high schools, and just to be able to work with these youth, and so kind of a little bit behind of what a school resource officer does is it's building relationships. That's the number one thing when we go into schools. Now especially with many of the immigrants and newcomers in the schools, they have such a negative take on policing, on military, government, all that kind of stuff. So when they see a police officer in the school, there's a lot of fear that goes in. And then as a police officer, when you show up at a home of a newcomer or immigrant, there's a lot of shame behind that as well. I'm not saying that there's not shame with, for us as Canadians or North Americans as well. Like, oh man, what did your kid do that there's a cop
Right.
car in front of your house? But what I really learned is that how, as a police officer in the schools, to build that relationship and to let, especially the newcomers know, we're here to build a relationship. We're here to um, be of, I guess, of service, of help. We're here that if you need something, come talk to us. I did a lot of presentations, went into the classrooms, talked a lot about, age of consent. What does that look like? Digital awareness. What happens because, I mean, what back 16 years ago, phones were in, but it's not like it was today.
Right.
So it was, kind of teaching when you put a photo on, it stays there forever. It's not like the Snapchat where people think it disappears because really it doesn't, as we all know and people have learned the hard way. So just talking about what that all looks like and then even about healthy relationships. What does that mean? Because many kids don't know what a healthy relationship is because it's not in their family as well. So now what does that look like for them? And when they start dating and, going into that, what does that look like? So there's a lot to being a school resource officer. It's not just about enforcement. And yes, we do that. However, there's a lot of other ways that we can enforce stuff where it's not charging, it's not fines. For instance, I worked in one of the schools that was more in a low income and high immigrant area. So a lot of the parents were working, some of them 2 to 3 jobs. Kids were raising their other younger siblings. And so when, like, for instance, smoking under the age of 18, it's illegal here. So, you get a ticket. Well, the fine is quite high, especially for somebody who doesn't have a job or their parents, don't have a full income. So what I ended up doing is I would give the ticket and I would say, if you want this ticket quashed or taken away, I need you on Wednesday to meet me. We are going to go pick up cigarette butts and clean up the area around the community. And so we did it. I had gloves. We, got the kids together. They started doing it. Every Wednesday, though, I started getting more and more kids, but I wasn't having tickets that I was giving them because the kids now felt that they were actually giving back to their community, and people would come out of their houses and thank them for doing that and for cleaning it up. So it kind of became more of a kind of a community team building, um, I guess, relationship wise, doing these things, not just for punishment, but actually to show the kids, you know what? Here's how we can actually give back. So little things like that, where they came, the tickets were gone. I'd rip them up and say, you know what? You guys did your work, but they would still keep coming. So again, yes, enforcement for fights, for, drugs, all that kind of stuff that goes on. And even, even domestic, we forget that domestic violence and domestic abuse occurs in teenage relationships, right? It's not just in adult relationships. So, that was another thing that just dealing and working with. So again, it's not all enforcement. It was about community building, relationship building, um, learning who the kids are, learning who the parents are, finding out what's important to some of these kids and what their dreams and passions and goals are. Because once you learn that, it kind of goes back to as a leadership. When you learn that, you can see so much more in each of these kids. Even if they have a little bit of bad streaks in them, there is so much more to them.
Yeah, I love that. What a cool story. That's a really neat impact that you make. And you in the book, I know you share a lot of really powerful stories and experiences that you had. And I'm just thinking as you were telling that story about the first story that you kind of open up the book with, where you clearly there's right now an issue with police community relationships, depending on maybe the community and the agency and people's experiences. And so what you did was to help restore that or build that. And so from an investigative standpoint, I would imagine people are more likely to come forward with information, or even if they're a victim, to be able to feel comfortable to come forward to you. And you kick off the book with a story that I'll let you share, obviously from your perspective, but about a student who was needed an outcry for help, and you were the person that he was going to reach out to. So, how did you find that you developed those types of relationships with somebody in the role that you were in?
The biggest thing, again, is being present, no judgment, um, actually listening, active hearing, because a lot of times the kids will say things, but there's so much underlying. And it goes back even, with stuff like suicide or self-harm. There's always an underlying issue. This is now the behavior and kind of I kind of feel it's kind of the end and the last resort where they're looking for somebody at the cry for help. They're looking for somebody just to see them, hear them, value them. But again, there's so much more underlying. And when you can finally get to what is underlying, then you know what? Stuff just starts opening up. And that goes anywhere. Again, that can be taken from, as I say, the kitchen table into the boardroom, from the schools into leadership of getting to know your people. What happens if one of your people, one of your high achieving um, employees, all of a sudden you realize like something's going on with them because they're coming in, they're not happy as they usually are. Take that time to go and sit with them. It's like with kids. Find out, you know what? I'm noticing you're just, you're not your happy self. What's going on? What's happening? Is there something that I can do or that, you want to chat about? Um, and that just again opens up just an area for people to be able to have a safe space to talk.
Yeah, and I know we're going to get into the calm method, which I think will give people some more of a tactical, intentional approach to those kind of relationships. But as you were just saying that, I'm thinking about, so yeah, you're right. In the corporate space, you have somebody who all of a sudden is um, maybe less than urgent in their responsiveness on emails. And the investigative space, a lot of our listeners are conducting interviews where somebody has made a poor decision and stolen money from their company, or discriminated against someone, or committed a crime, but that doesn't necessarily make them a bad person. And if
Mhm.
you give them the space to talk about what they're going through, not only is it the humane thing to do, but it will probably also yield more information. And that's what it seems like you got in your stories and your experience, is when you gave somebody that space, you were learning maybe so much more about what they're going through than maybe even their parents or some of their closest friends were hearing about. Is that what you experienced?
I did. I really experienced that. And as you were saying that, one of the stories that stands out in my head was as a patrol officer. Um, I remember there was a gentleman who had fallen out of his wheelchair, and he was a homeless man who kind of was around or transient, I guess, around the area all the time. And cars were literally driving around him. He was in a crosswalk, but it had fallen out and he couldn't get back in. And so people were driving around, nobody stopped. And so I was pulling up and saw him, so blocked off the area, got out. I mean, I'm not a big person, so trying to, like lifted up the wheelchair. And I remember I'm trying to get kind of underneath this gentleman to at least lift him back into the wheelchair. And then I asked him, can I take you somewhere? Like we've got some shelters where you can go get some food. And so he said, sure, can you take me here? So there's a few of the shelters where we have to call ahead to ask if this person can come or if they are not allowed to come. And so he was able to come. So placed him into the back of my car, put the wheelchair into my trunk, and started driving. And he asked, "Why did you stop to help me?" And I'm thinking, well, because number one, you're a human being and you needed some help. I mean, and then number two, I'm a cop. So that's what I do. That's why I came on the job, is to help people. And, so just letting him know that, chatted a bit more. And as we got to the location, I'm pulling up and I put the car in park and he said to me, he's like, "Thank you for treating me like a human being." I was very taken back by that because every person wants to be seen, valued, and heard, right? That's just adults, youth, no matter who you are. And it doesn't matter, again, whether you are transient or you are some CEO of a company, we all want that. So I thought, wow, you know, for him to have to say that and for him to feel that he's not even a human to some people, that's really sad.
Yeah.
Like really sad. So that I have taken with me all through the rest of my career. And no matter who you are, and like you said, people make mistakes. We bring in mental health issues. We bring in people are in dire straits of stuff and they do things. And then there are just those people that no matter what, they're just not very good people, right? I mean,
Right.
there is that small percentage. But no matter what, again, there's always something underlying. And so to take that time to look into that and actually get to the bottom of it, again, many people they're beautiful people on the inside. There's stuff going on and they're hurting.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a powerful example. And it's just giving people the space and empathy and respect to share their story. And when you were saying that, and earlier you were talking about, the different and maybe technological access from kids from 15 to 20 years ago to kids today. And so I'm just thinking about bullying. I know you talk about this in the book a little bit too. So I've got two nephews, but both are thankfully young enough that they're not on the socials yet. But I just think about when people are experiencing things that they don't maybe feel treated like a human and they're being bullied. And 20 years ago, it was maybe you're in the school atmosphere and then you go home and you go to hopefully a safe space or at least a comfortable space. And now, um, kids can't get away from it, right? Because it's
Yeah.
on social media and they all got cell phones. And so I'm just back to this concept. If you had just parents listening and other school resource officers listening, any advice or suggestions on how to better connect or represent for kids that might be dealing with those types of issues outside of just the normal school day?
Yeah. Well, number one, parents need to parent. We can't be friends with our kids. And we're watching that more and more where kids literally are running the households. Parents are afraid to say anything. I had some parents come back to me and actually say that their kids told them they would call social services if their Xbox or phone was taken away. And I said, okay, they can try calling, but that's not how it works.
Right.
So as parents, we are losing our parenting parents. That's the biggest thing. Secondly, as a parent, you own the phone. You own social media and the fact of Wi-Fi, all of that kind of stuff. If you need to, and sometimes tough love comes in, you know what? Shut off the Wi-Fi 7:30, 8 o'clock every night. And I've had some parents do that where it's like, nope, you know what? Nothing, no TV, no nothing. We're spending family time or reading, doing or schoolwork or whatever that is. Again, when it comes to phones, kids do not need phones in their bedrooms. So, what is happening? And when I was writing my book, I talked to a number of pediatricians as well as emergency doctors because what they were finding, kids are not getting into their REM sleep. And so, because they have their phone under their pillow. And of course, as soon as it vibrates, your brain is like, oh my goodness, who is liking my post? What just happened? I've got to be in on it. And that's how we work as humans right now in this world. So instead, and again, I had kids and parents say, well, it's an alarm clock. You know what? Go to Walmart, go to Target, get an alarm clock, a cheap one with big numbers that all you have to do is press a button that it shuts off or turns on. And parents should be taking the phones out of the bedrooms, plugging them in the kitchen. I've had other parents have to actually lock them in the parents' bedroom because there's an addiction to the phone, and there is, and social media. So number one, parents need to take control. A lot of times, too, parents are actually paying for that phone. So technically, it is registered to you. You should be knowing all the passwords. You should be knowing who your kids are talking to at any time. As a parent, you have the right to say, hey, you know what? Can I just check your phone? If your kid is saying no, you have a problem. And again, sometimes parents don't want to, it's like, well, I don't want my kids to hate me. Well, your job is to parent. Your job is, you know, boundaries. And I don't like the word boundaries. I like the word guardrails because it's something that kind of protects.
Cool.
And our job as parents, we need to protect our kids and we need to teach them lessons. We need to, have them learn. That's what we need to be doing. And even with the guardrails, it starts, I remember even with my son, I would choose, two or three outfits, put them on the bed, and those were the guardrails. So he knew, but he had a choice of what he wanted to pick. So he thought, wow, this is pretty cool. But the guardrails were up. So again, as parents, we need to go. Sometimes, again, it's tough love, but really stick to what does parenting look like for us? And maybe it was terrible when we were growing up. And so we're trying to go completely the opposite side, which is more of a detriment to our kids. And so, if you need help in trying to figure out, or there's shame involved or anything like that, reach out to somebody to talk to somebody about it. You're not alone with that.
Yeah, and it's funny because I know this is the point of a lot of what you're talking about, but as you're going through talking about parenting and working with kids, I'm thinking about working with employees or working with either people in an investigation who you might have to talk to, and a lot of these things clearly connect, which I know is really where your perspective comes from, which is really just so cool. From mom role to police officer role to SRO role to now doing all the other work that you're doing, and I know in that process, you've developed the calm method. So it's really more how are you actually engaging with people is what it seems like, and it's an acronym. So we've got connection, awareness, language, and measured response. And we'll break these down in a second, but before we get to each piece of that, where did that come from? Like what inspired you to create or maybe recognize that that's the approach you want to use?
Again, looking back with the leadership, how many amazing people are leaving. And I was watching it with the police, and when it comes down to leadership, what are they missing? Why are leaders losing so many people? And what does it kind of all go under? And it goes under engagement and connection. And so, along with my book, there's this umbrella where no matter who you are talking to, that connection and engagement is so important. And it kind of flows all throughout. So, looking at that, I was, kind of trying to figure, okay, there's always chaos. Like so many people have chaos in their lives. In business, there's chaos going on. Well, how do we get to this calm and what does that look like? And so, as I started kind of pulling calm apart, that's where I started coming up with the acronym of what that looks like. And again, chaos and calm look very different to everybody, right? But when we look in, say, a company, what chaos can look like and what calm looks like is very similar amongst companies and amongst how many corporations run. So that's
Yeah.
how I kind of came up with that.
Yeah, I like that. It's probably similar to how a household is run or a team
Exactly.
or a company. Yeah, which is really neat. And so let's break these down. So the first one, I'm actually going to pull this quote because I really like this on your website. So I don't, you weren't prepared for me to read from your website, but it's a good one. But the letter C you have is connection, and on the website you have connection heals what correction can't.
Yeah.
When you lead with heart, you don't just change outcomes, you change lives. And when you told that story earlier about the cigarettes, it kind of reminded me of that. But maybe explain more. What do you mean by connection heals what correction can't?
So again, it starts with trust, right? I mean, when you connect with somebody, you're building that trust. And trust can heal a lot. And instead, as leaders, many of us, and I think all of us have had those leaders where it's like, do this, this is what I've done before, this works. Um, Instead of kind of, again, like I said, walking next to you and building that trust of who they are, what they stand for, getting to know who you are, and then leading with empathy. They're, listening first, um, making people feel seen, even when everything's under pressure. So people don't need to be corrected all the time. Yes, there are certain things, and I even look with policing. Yes, we do need to correct, even with our kids. However, if you don't have that connection first, why should somebody listen to you with correction? Whereas
Right.
when you build that connection and that trust, when you say something in I don't want to say a loving way, but in a more stronger way of maybe something to correct, they're more apt to listen to you because now they feel they know you and that you have taken the time to value them.
Have you seen the opposite in your experience, whether in the law enforcement space or in the corporate world, where you are able to identify, hey, this person is they don't have trust and they're trying to correct everything, or they're trying to use discipline as a method of change, and it's just a toxic environment. Have you seen experiences like that?
Yeah, well, I've seen it both in corporate because I was in corporate before I went into policing, and then of course in policing, and we see that with I don't want to say leaders because not everybody is a leader. Uh, People can be managers, supervisors. However, there's very select few who actually are true leaders. So we see that with supervisors and managers where it is do as I say, not as I do. Um, and you watch the just how all of a sudden this group of employees under that one supervisor, the that resentment starts in there and they're not going to do anything that that person has asked them to do. And all of a sudden, the morale goes down and the supervisor's wondering, well, why? Like, why are these people not listening? Well, to the employees, it's very clear why they're not. However, the supervisor sometimes has no clue, really has no clue why.
Right. Yeah. So on the positive side, and you've shared some of these already, but do you have a time where you have seen that connection, having true connection, really change the outcome?
Yes, and it's again, it's a story. We had I guess it was a hit and run, excuse me, at a gas station, and a guy had filled up a gas. It was, of course, in a stolen vehicle. The lady had come out and was starting to pull away, and she ran in front of the vehicle to try to say, "Hey, you got to pay for gas." And he hit and ran her over and took off. And I was a school resource officer at the time, and I'll never forget. Usually, when people come into the schools, they have to check in with the office. You can't just trespass coming into the school. However, where my office was in this one school was near a set of doors that led to the outside, and they were unlocked at the time. And all of a sudden, this male and female walked in. The female was pregnant at the time, And they saw me and said, "I'm not sure if you remember me, but at another school, you were my SRO. We knew you were here at this school. Can we talk to you?" So they came in and sat down. Well, this gentleman was the passenger in that vehicle that had done the hit and run, and started just talking about how here's where the person is that you guys are looking for. Here's where the vehicle is. I felt that I really needed to come forward, but I didn't know who to come forward to until I knew that you were here. And then his girlfriend, who was just about 8 months pregnant, said, "I believe there's a warrant out for my arrest. I want to deal with this now before I have my baby, because I don't want to have my baby in jail. But if I have to, I've got some support around, but I would like to turn myself in." So I'm kind of sitting here going, holy cow. Okay, so we've got a homicide, like a major investigation going on here. So I contacted homicide, let them know this is what I have here. And so they came, interviewed. Yep, they were able to locate the driver, the vehicle, all of that stuff. And then the girl, yes, she did have a warrant, went and dealt with that. But you talk about trust and you talk about somebody coming in and feeling that they can give themselves up. Like they're giving, like, this is huge. I mean,
Right.
they know they're going to be going to jail, their lives are going to be changing. And, but yet they felt that they could come and do that. So again, I know that's from the policing world. I mean, there's leaders though, again, where if you feel as a leader, people will actually come and talk to you and tell you things, um, because you've taken the time to get to know them. Even I was talking to one CEO actually who said that he had an employee come to him and ask if he could give some ideas for the way the company was going. And this was just, he called himself just a lowly employee, like nobody kind of important. But the CEO said these ideas that he brought forward were so amazing and people hadn't thought about that. He's like, I'm so glad I gave him the opportunity to grab a coffee and just to kind of let him talk and get to know him, because this actually led their company in a new direction.
That's great. And both of those examples are not, because it seems easy, right? People that have never been in the law enforcement space are like, well, what an easy job. People are just turning themselves in, and that's not normal. But both,
No,
and for an employee to approach a CEO and say, I've got an idea that's different than everything we've been doing, that's not normal either, unless in both circumstances, the leader or the SRO has created the foundation of trust, right? And connection. And
yeah.
I think that's really the point. And that's so powerful, is there's a lot of work that leads up to that, right? Reputational work and past performance that develops that trust. Otherwise, this doesn't connect.
It's true. Well, and then it leads into the home too. As a parent, if you actually have that trust with your kids and that connection with your kids, the stuff that they will tell you and feel that they can talk to you about is mind blowing,
Right.
right? So again, it's just opening up that communication.
Although I had my nephews both on a podcast, which was my favorite. I mean, all these guests like you are incredible people, but when you put a 5 and 7 year old and mic them up, you never know what they're going to say. And
I know.
but I opened it up and said, they had their space, but one of them thinks that the Earth is flat, so we're going to have to correct that. So sometimes they'll tell you things that you need to know to correct a little bit, but.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we got connection, really important. Those are good examples. The second we have, letter A in calm, is awareness,
Yeah.
which I mean, all of these are important and maybe difficult for some people, but just in my ignorant look at all of this, I'm thinking, man, self-awareness is a big gap that people have. So when you say awareness, are you talking about self-awareness, emotional awareness, awareness of the other person? What do you mean by that?
I think it all goes in together because you know what? You can't lead others if you can't read the room, right? So going in there, yeah, you might have an agenda. However, when you go in and all of a sudden, and many times you can feel that vibe, like you walk into a room and it's like, whew, okay, there's something heavy going on here. Maybe I'm gonna kind of ease a little back on what I wanted to really push and maybe bring it forward to whoever we're talking to. And again, this could be with your kids. This could be as a leader going into a board meeting, or as an investigator going into an interview. And all of a sudden, you can just feel, you know what, maybe I need to kind of ease it up and maybe start a little bit, I don't want to say lower, but just, yeah, get down and really maybe get to know what's going on with this person. Um, so that's a huge thing. Again, it's understanding your emotions, the triggers, team dynamics, and leading with emotional intelligence. And I know sometimes that's a big buzzword. However, it is a buzzword that actually is very important when it comes to leaders and to when you do investigations as law enforcement, all of that kind of thing. And then as parents.
Yeah. And I think what I've experienced, even though we talk about self-awareness, is sometimes it might be necessary for some people to leverage their peers or other folks they're working with to seek that feedback, right? Because I
Mhm.
think some people don't realize how they're coming across in a meeting or in delivery of something, or the way their face looks during a presentation or a team meeting or something that looks like they hate everybody in the room or
Yeah.
whatever it might be. But I mean, how, other than maybe asking peers for feedback, are there other things that leaders can do to kind of be aware of their like their triggers or communication triggers that might set them off where they're maybe overly emotionally invested in a conversation or not in the right state of mind?
I think for leaders, and I think actually this is for anybody, we all have our trauma. We all have our stuff from what we've kind of come up as we've grown up, and where we are now. And many of us know that we have triggers, but we push them down. And as I was writing this book, that was the biggest thing actually that kind of hit me was when people read this, never mind youth, but as adults are reading this could trigger stuff that maybe they have not dealt with, or they thought they had dealt with and moved on, but it's brought something else up. I had one parent contact me and say, I actually had to stop reading because it was triggering me so much that I was really upset that my kids are having to go through similar stuff that I had to go through. So I think it's the biggest thing is just being aware, and again, like awareness, but being aware of where we are, what things we have gone through, and what things we know trigger us. And then when you're having a coffee meeting and you have an idea of what is going to be talked about or the agenda, look over it before. And especially as a leader, if there's something in there that is, might be triggering or you may have a hard time dealing with, sometimes why not be honest? Again, and authentic with whoever you're talking to. Now, again, it's reading the room, right? But coming forward and saying, you know what? As I was kind of thinking about what we were going to be talking about, this kind of hit a chord with me because I really struggled with this earlier on. And here's some of the things that kind of worked and didn't work for me, but I wanted to just let you know. And, when you think back, what a huge thing that just kind of cuts things down to say, hey, you know what? I'm a real person as well, just like you. I've gone through things, I go through things. And it's like people looking at a cop and realizing they're a mom, they're a dad, they're a sister, brother, aunt, uncle, daughter, son. That's who they are. The uniform's just the uniform.
Yeah, I couple things there that triggered for me. One, we had an episode with Professor Haley Cleary, and she's a developmental psychologist, and she focuses a lot on, especially on false confessions and interrogations with youthful people. But we did talk a lot about these like adverse childhood experiences that can present themselves later on in life. So you have some kind of trauma as a child, and that might make you more vulnerable or suggestible later
Yeah.
in life. And so between that and then what you just said, I'm thinking about an investigator's role where they're dealing with a lot of secondary trauma or vicarious trauma where they could be interviewing somebody as a victim of domestic violence. Maybe they experienced that themselves or somebody in their family did, or sexual assault. or even they've never experienced it, but they're surrounded by hearing these just terrible stories all the time. So I think, I don't know if that relates to your awareness as well, but maybe just being aware of like, how is this going to impact me and what's my reaction look like in an interview?
Yeah, very much so. And, looking at that for myself, one of the things that was important to me is every month I went for maintenance with the psychologist because, again, whether you come through, especially with our job, you never know every day what's going to happen. So whether or not it was hugely traumatic or not, I mean, I don't know what's traumatic or not anymore, right? I mean,
Right.
with what I've been through, but it was very important that I went and sought maintenance. And I think that that's something for anybody, no matter who you are. You don't have to be in law enforcement. You can be anywhere. But I think that that's so important is to make sure that you take care of yourself and you're aware of yourself of what you need.
Right. And and I think you referenced this earlier, but as a leader is having that connection with your team to recognize when they might need it. They might need it too. 'Cause I think sometimes,
Hugely. Yeah.
people don't feel comfortable reaching out for help if there's a stigma around it, and especially in law enforcement in that environment.
Yes.
The third piece you had in so letter L, language, which really is a lot of the core of what we talk about on this podcast all the time, is what words are we using? Maybe how we're presenting those words, but what is the actual language that we're using? So what do you mean by language? How does that help either build or break trust?
So words can either escalate or they can anchor. We all know that. And, using clear, calm communication is so huge, and especially when it's during conflict, because so many times as human beings, when stuff rises, tones rise, we're going to rise. And I used to call it the chirping method, where, somebody chirps and then somebody chirps over them, and it's just, over and over and over. And nothing is dealt with, nothing is settled. And so, just even as a leader, to model, you want to model safety and you want to model clarity. And language, again, is so important, bringing in tone. Bringing in even body language is huge. Like you were saying, if you've got that face where it's like you look mad all the time and mad at the world, why do people want to come and say anything to you? Right? People say we have the open door policy. Well, how real is this open door policy when half the time you feel that it's being closed on you?
Yeah.
So again, language can, like I said, it either anchors or it can escalate stuff so fast.
I think that's really important. And I'm thinking in a normal everyday conversation, if you and I are sitting having coffee, that's easy, right? Because there's no controversy there. But for people that when you are entering a difficult conversation, to me, this could be an argument with like a loved one. This could be a teenager who's arguing back with mom or dad, or this could be in an investigative setting, talking to somebody who's not being cooperative. And that when the
Mhm.
emotions get high, I would imagine is when it's most difficult to control the language and the tone. So what's a good way to just check ourselves there in those emotional settings?
Well, and this may sound cheesy, but just taking a breath before you are actually going to spurt out, because again, when it kind of goes into the next one with a measured response, but we will react very quickly because in our mind, it's like somebody's just come at us, so we're going to react. Instead of doing that, though, it's taking a deep breath and it's like, okay, right now there's a lot of chaos going on in here. And a lot of times, each party is not listening or hearing what the other one is saying. So to even say, I'm hearing what you're saying and you're sounding quite upset. Can you talk a bit more so I have a bit more better understanding of what is actually going on or what your concern is? Or, even with your kid, why do you feel that you should be allowed to go to this party or this kind of stuff? Or to take the car or, like those little things like that. And even I think when it comes to interrogation, um, yes, there's ways that we've been trained to do it. However, sometimes you have to push those to the side for a moment and again, kind of take it down to the ABCs,
Yeah.
if
Well, and
that
I
makes
think
sense.
legacy, old school interrogation techniques aren't reflective of what we're talking about right now, right? That's going to focus on more confrontation, which we just know is not the most effective way to get reliable information. And so, yeah, as you were saying that, I'm thinking the higher the emotions in your response, probably the lower the quality of your response. And the way I've always kept it in, not always kept it in check, because I know I've failed on some of these multiple times, I'm sure. But for me, it's recognizing what's the end game of this conversation, right? If my goal for an interview is to get as much information as possible, what is a did to, did not argument going to get me? No, nowhere. If my goal is to try to change somebody's behavior, and it's me just telling them what to do versus listening, is that really going to change the outcome, or maybe just momentarily, but we're not going to be bought in and have that connection. So that's what keeps it for me, is what is the end game? And take that breath, like you said, is a really good idea, and just slow down and kind of focus on that collaboration, which, not to get political here, but this would be ideal if we had politicians listening to this where they could actually work together maybe to solve some
Yes.
problems. Yeah.
Well,
You're
and a lot of times when emotions start rising, we know it in a interrogation. They're like, I'm not talking anymore. We know it with our kids. I'm not talking anymore. Or with our spouses, silent treatment, right?
Yeah,
So
right.
we, we know it doesn't work. However, we keep doing it.
Right. It's the easy way out, and you feel the pride. It's like being witty is not being strategic, right? It's like you feel good for the moment, and then you realize you're just going backwards, right? You're not
Yeah,
achieving
exactly.
the goal. The last piece, and you just referenced this because I think these kind of tie together, is the letter M. So measured response. So now it's probably what kind of the area we're talking about is how do we reflect and respond versus maybe just react. But what do you mean by measured response? And I like the two words there together. What makes a response measured?
So reacting is easy, right? We can all react, but responding is leadership because you can react, but now when you stop and actually again take a breath and it's like, okay, what do I want out of this? What can, even if it looks, how can I make it so each person in here feels seen, valued, and heard? Um, and again, that's leadership, right? And even when we think of interrogation and dealing with a bad guy, I'll just say, no matter what, yes, our end result is, we want charges laid and the truth coming out and all that stuff. However, if they feel seen, valued, and heard, it's amazing again how much more. And it might take an hour versus 6 hours
Right.
of getting that information out. So it's, staying steady, right? Just grounded, be intentional, but again, be aware of, reading the room. Is what do I really, like you said, what do I really want out of this? And is it worth going into this battle or fight, or dying on this hill in order to get what I want? And I think it comes down to no matter how high the stakes are, you just have to be grounded and intentional.
Right. Well, I think it's so powerful. These are great and so practical, right? Takeaways for people to absorb and adapt. My question to you though is, like, we have these podcast conversations. A lot of people talk about, here's my sales technique, or here's this approach and how I do this or whatever, and it sounds great and we can write about it. But then we go back to our regular lives and we forget everything that we're supposed to be doing in the first place. Even somebody like you who's created this concept, right, recognized it. So how do you keep that in check, right? Because I could imagine going to this weekend, you get into an argument with somebody and completely forget everything that you just said, or maybe not forget it, but not apply it because you're in an emotional state at that time. But do you ever find yourself thinking like, wait a second, I wrote a book and talk about this all the time, and I'm not even doing it myself?
Oh yeah, there's been times and I really believe it's a habit, right? You have to just again stop, be aware. Um Even now with the whole CALM acronym, it's ingrained in my head now. So even with my child, all of a sudden, I'll an argument can not an argument, I guess a discussion
Right.
can start up. And then, it can very easily, again, the emotions, like you said, the emotions take over. But then it's kind of like, okay, whoa, whoa, whoa. What do I really want out of this? Is it going to be worth it in the end of getting into this big blowout? and then having to go say, I'm sorry, and, kid's not talking to you for a few days. Or again, if I can really start practicing this on a daily basis, even if it's just the little things, but even just going through what the CALM acronym is in my head, um, it's a habit. That's the biggest thing is that you have to practice it. It
Yeah.
becomes a habit, just like anything else that we do and learn to do.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, repetition. We had, and I feel like I've referenced a bunch of prior episodes, but this is great because the point of this is everything is so intertwined. We had Mark Anderson on, who former law enforcement, really just impressive career, and but he was talking about the same thing about habits, and what you practice every day at home is going to be how you show up at work, and vice versa. But even for me, we focus so much time now on training people to allow for silence in an interview, more so space rather than just silence, but um, not interrupting, asking open-ended questions. But then I find myself sometimes in my personal life not doing any of those things. It's like, wait a second, just build that habit. But it's easy to fall victim to the opposite. So
Yeah.
um, before we wrap up, I want to make sure that people have some other ways to learn, because we talked about a lot of stuff today, and there's so many more resources out there. So I know I referenced the book, so we'll post this in our show notes, and they can find it on your website. But what was the book Youth Truth: Engaging in Conversations That Can Change Lives? What was the core message or the purpose, like your mission behind writing this in the first place?
There was a couple things. The biggest thing is that as parents, aunts, uncles, anybody who deals with youth, coaches, youth advocates, you're not alone. And this allows you to realize what's going on in our schools, and it continues to go on in our schools. What can be done in the fact of tools. It's not a self help book because, as parents, as advocates, we don't need any more self help. We need tools because some things work with some things don't. So it's tools of what we can kind of add onto our tool belt. And then again, for the parents and advocates for youth, to know that you're not alone. And then for the youth to read this, you're not alone as a youth, and you can be of help to your peers.
Yeah, I love that. And then, like I said earlier, it's the way you wrote it and the way the stories come across. It connects. It feels like you're sitting just next to you and you're sharing the life experience and not realizing what you're learning along the way. So really powerful. I like that. I'm gonna
Thank you.
ask our listeners just a couple things. If you obviously enjoyed our conversation with Carla May today, if you could like, subscribe, rate the podcast. The more of that we get, the more it's exposed to other people. So that's our whole point here, is to provide this education to as many people as possible. So share it with anyone who's in a leadership role, deals with any other human in any other part of their life, and especially if they deal with kids. I think there's a lot of good takeaways here. But the other ask I have is to connect with you. So what is the best way for people? Because I know you're doing working with corporate organizations, you're doing a lot of speaking now. On their website, you've got some really cool presentations that you typically do, but I'm sure you do a whole bunch more than that. But how can people find more about you and what you're doing today?
So my website, www.carlamaysheremata.com. And then Instagram and Facebook, I am learning to get back onto social because as a cop, I was not on social. But again, it's Carla May Sheremata is what I'm under for both. And yeah, on the website, it shows just even different workshops and just things to be able to engage. And email is on there. So just please connect, or if you have any questions or concerns, just connect with me and we can chat.
Yeah, a lot of great content, and we'll link all of that in the show notes. So if you're listening while you're driving, please do not try to type in and Google her name and figure out how to find the website. So we'll link the socials and the website. Yeah, I saw they got some workshops on being pink in a blue world. So that seems pretty neat, especially your perspective in the law enforcement space. I think that would resonate with a lot of our listeners. So a lot of really cool stuff that you have on there.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for your time today and all the work that you've done in your career and what you continue to do. I think it's clearly making an impact on not just youth, but hopefully investigators globally as we spread the message. So thanks for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Yeah, you too. Thank you all for listening to this episode of Truth Be Told.
To help more listeners find our show, please provide us a rating, give us a follow, and share this episode with your colleagues. For the latest news and to engage with our guests, follow Truth Be Told on your favorite social media apps. And don't forget, we are available on all major platforms, including Apple, Spotify, and watch a video of this episode on YouTube. On behalf of our guests and valued sponsors, thanks again for listening to this episode of Truth Be Told.